a king charges into battle, sword raised, leading from the front like a medieval hero, and in minutes he's dead, along with most of Scotland's nobility, in the worst military disaster in Scottish history. This is September 9th, 1513, at Flodden Field in northern England, where James IV of Scotland and 10,000 of his men lie slaughtered, ending medieval Scotland not with political collapse, but with one catastrophic afternoon of violence that wipes out an entire generation of leadership. But to understand how Scotland reached this tragic climax, we need to rewind 100 years to 410 AD, when Roman legions withdraw from Britain, leaving a power vacuum that 4 distinct peoples rush to fill. Picture the landscape north of Hadrian's Wall, the Picts controlling the vast highlands and northeast. Fierce warriors with mysterious symbol stones scattered across their territory, and a unique matrilineal succession system where kingship passes through the female line. West of them, the Gaels of Dalriada, Irish settlers who arrived around 500 AD, control the western highlands and islands, their kingdom connected more by sea routes than roads, longboats serving as highways. South of both, the Britons maintained kingdoms around Dumbarton Rock, that dramatic, volcanic outcrop, commanding the Clyde River, speaking a language related to Welsh, while preserving Romano-British administrative traditions. And pressing northward from England, the Anglo-Saxons of Northumbria, aggressive and expanding, bringing their own forms of Christianity and governance. These 4 groups, Picts, Gaels, Britons, Anglo-Saxons, fight, trade, intermarry, and gradually forge what will become Scotland. But first, they need something to unite them beyond constant warfare. Enter Christianity, arriving through multiple channels but crystallizing around one man, Saint Columba, the Irish monk, who establishes a monastery on the tiny Hebridean island of Iona around 563 AD. Iona's strategic location, accessible by sea from Ireland, Dalriada, and Pictish territories, makes it perfect for missionary work, and Columba's royal connections within Dalriada provide crucial support. When he converts the Pictish king Bride mac Maelchon in the 560s, vast territories open to Christian influence, and suddenly these warring peoples share something, a common faith that transcends tribal boundaries. But Christianity brings more than spiritual unity. It brings literacy, written records, legal documents, administrative continuity. Monasteries like Iona become nodes of learning, economic activity, political power. Monks from noble families create networks bridging religious and secular authority. And literacy gives rulers who can read and write massive advantages over illiterate competitors. Meanwhile, warfare remains constant. In 685 AD, the Northumbrian king Ecgfrith launches a major invasion of Pictish territory, seeking permanent control over wealthy lands north of the Firth of Forth. The Pictish king Bride mac Billy draws the Northumbrian army deep into Pictish territory before turning to fight near modern Dunechan in Angus. The Battle of Dunectine results in catastrophic Northumbrian defeat. King Ecgfrith killed along with much of his army. And this victory effectively ends Northumbrian expansion northward and establishes Pictish dominance over eastern Scotland for the next 150 years. But here's where it gets complicated. These kingdoms don't just fight, they intermarry constantly. Pictish kings adopt Gaelic names. Dalriadan rulers claim Pictish royal titles. Children born from cross-cultural marriages possess complex ethnic identities, transcending tribal boundaries. By the early 9th century, the bloodlines are so intertwined that one man can legitimately claim authority over both Picts and Gaels. His name is Kenneth MacAlpin, born around 810 into the Dalriadan royal house, but connected to Pictish royalty through his mother's line. Remember, Picts trace succession through females. Kenneth's path to power opens when Viking raids intensify dramatically during the early 9th century. Norse longships penetrate deep into Scottish waters, establishing permanent bases in the northern and western isles, disrupting trade routes, destroying coastal settlements. The Vikings prove particularly devastating to Dalriada, whose scattered island territories and sea-dependent economy make it especially vulnerable. Simultaneously, both Picts and Gaels face severe succession crises fracturing internal stability. Around 843 AD, Kenneth moves decisively, launching his bid for power. Rather than conquering the Pictish kingdom through force alone, he pursues sophisticated strategy combining legitimate dynastic claims through his mother's family with military resources from his Dalriadan base. The unification process takes years of maneuvering, strategic marriages, and occasional violence against opponents. But Kenneth succeeds where others failed, becoming king of both Picts and Gaels, creating a unified kingdom that will become known as Alba, Scotland. His method? Blend the cultures rather than impose one over the other. New stone sculptures commissioned during his reign incorporate traditional Pictish artistic motifs alongside Gaelic inscriptions and Christian symbolism, creating visual statements of unified authority speaking to both communities. He systematically arranges marriages between his extended family and prominent Pictish noble houses, creating kinship networks binding former enemies. Children born from these unions possess unquestionable claims in both traditions. Kenneth establishes Scone as the ceremonial centre, strategically located in former Pictish heartland, demonstrating his commitment to ruling from within Pictish lands rather than imposing Dalriadan dominance. The Stone of Destiny, upon which Scottish kings will be inaugurated for centuries, is installed at Scone during this period. Gaelic gradually assumes prominence as the language of royal administration, not through forced imposition but through practical advantages. The external Viking threat actually strengthens Kenneth's position by providing compelling justification for unification. Separate kingdoms proved inadequate to resist Norse pressure, but unified Scotland can marshal greater resources. Kenneth's death around 858 marks the end of unification, but the kingdom he created proves remarkably durable. The MacAlpin dynasty rules Scotland for nearly 2 centuries. Fast forward to 1034, Malcolm II dies, succeeded by Duncan I, whose brief reign ends when Macbeth kills him in battle in 1040. Yes, that Macbeth. Though Shakespeare's version bears little resemblance to reality, the historical Macbeth rules effectively for 17 years, maintains peace with England and Norway, even makes a pilgrimage to Rome in 1050 where he distributes money to the poor with exceptional generosity. But his legitimacy remains contested, and his reign ends in 1057 when Malcolm III, Duncan's son returned from English exile, reclaims his father's throne. Malcolm III, known as Canmore or Great Chief, ascends in 1058 and rules for 35 years, fundamentally transforming Scotland. Malcolm's long exile at the English court of Edward the Confessor exposed him to administrative techniques and military innovations differing markedly from traditional Scottish approaches. Upon return, he brings English military support and advisors familiar with Anglo-Saxon systems. Between 1061 and 1093, Malcolm launches no fewer than 5 major invasions of northern England, each carefully planned to exploit English weakness. These aren't traditional Celtic raids, they're coordinated infantry and cavalry formations employing continental siege techniques. The first campaign in 1061 targets Northumbrian strongholds along the Tweed Valley. The Siege of Walk-on-Tweed demonstrates Malcolm's adoption of continental siege techniques. Scottish forces employ mangonels and mechanical devices to breach stone fortifications. His second invasion in 1070 coincides with aftermath of the Norman conquest, when northern England remains in turmoil following William the Conqueror's brutal suppression. Scottish forces advance as far south as the River Tees, establishing Scottish control over much of modern Northumberland. But Malcolm's marriage to Margaret of Wessex around 1070 represents far more than diplomatic alliance. It's a cultural revolution. Margaret, sister to Edgar Atheling and descendant of the Anglo-Saxon royal house, brings impeccable royal bloodlines and deep knowledge of continental European governmental practices. Her influence transforms the Scottish royal court from relatively informal Celtic institution into sophisticated European cultural centre. She introduces elaborate ceremonial protocols emphasizing the sacred nature of kingship while creating hierarchical structures reinforcing royal authority. The court attracts scholars, artists, clerics from across Europe, transforming Edinburgh Castle into a learning centre rivaling contemporary European courts. Margaret's religious reforms prove equally significant. She finds the Scottish Church dominated by Celtic traditions, differing markedly from Roman Catholic practices in liturgy, clerical celibacy, ecclesiastical organisation. Working with Lanfranc, Archbishop of Canterbury, she initiates comprehensive reforms bringing Scottish Christianity into conformity with Rome. Ancient Celtic monasteries operating with considerable independence are gradually transformed into institutions following Roman Catholic rules. But Margaret's influence extends beyond religion. She introduces new artistic forms, illuminated manuscripts, metalwork, architectural decoration, reflecting continental principles. A personal library becomes foundation for expanded educational opportunities within the royal court. The transformation Malcolm and Margaret achieve goes deeper than culture, it's territorial too. The modern Scottish-English border results from decades of Malcolm's warfare and negotiation. The key acquisitions occur in Lothian, the fertile region between the Firth of Forth and the Tweed, long contested between Scottish and English rulers. Malcolm's campaigns systematically capture major fortified centres controlling this region: Edinburgh, Roxburgh, Berwick upon Tweed. But military conquest alone can't secure permanent control. Malcolm's approach involves careful integration of existing English administrative systems with Scottish authority. English nobles who submit retain their lands but acknowledge Malcolm as overlord and provide military service. This avoids massive population displacement while creating genuine Scottish control. Malcolm constructs or strengthens castles at key locations, Edinburgh, Stirling, employing latest European military architecture with stone construction and sophisticated defensive features. The Treaty of Abernethy in 1072 represents crucial diplomatic settlement, temporarily resolving territorial disputes. Malcolm acknowledges William the Conqueror as overlord for English territories while retaining effective control over Scottish conquests in Lothian. The treaty provides for hostage exchange, including Malcolm's eldest son Duncan, educated at the Norman court. But the treaty proves unstable. Malcolm's subsequent invasions in 1079 and 1091 demonstrate his continued commitment to southward expansion. The development of feudal structures during Malcolm's reign represents fundamental transformation of traditional Celtic social organisation. Malcolm systematically grants land holdings to nobles who pledge personal loyalty and military service to the crown. These feudal charters establish legal relationships, binding recipients to provide specified numbers of armed warriors when required. The system creates networks of personal loyalty, strengthening royal power while providing superior military mobilization mechanisms. Feudal military service revolutionizes Scottish warfare capabilities. Feudal obligations require nobles to maintain specified numbers of armoured cavalry and infantry, creating professional capabilities competing with contemporary European armies. But Malcolm's death in 1093 during yet another English invasion leaves the transformation incomplete. His sons succeed him, continuing the policies he and Margaret established. By 1124, when Alexander the Hun dies, the throne passes to his younger brother David, and David will take these reforms further than anyone imagined possible. David dies ascends in 1124 after a quarter century of exile and education at Henry I of England's court, where he observed Anglo-Norman systems firsthand. His marriage to Maud de Senlis, daughter of the Earl of Northumbria, deepened his Anglo-Norman connections while providing extensive English landholdings, serving as both revenue source and laboratory for testing innovations. David's vision extends far beyond gradual change. He envisions comprehensive restructuring of Scottish society along Anglo-Norman lines. The cornerstone? Systematic introduction of feudalism through carefully planned grants of Scottish lands to Norman knights and administrators possessing military capabilities and administrative experience. Unlike previous rulers who occasionally employed foreign advisors, David embarks upon comprehensive colonization, fundamentally altering the composition of Scottish nobility. Walter Fitzalan, receiving extensive territories in Renfrewshire, becomes the first High Steward of Scotland, exemplifying the type of Norman noble David seeks. Walter brings proven administrative skills and family connections to highest levels of Anglo-Norman society. Robert de Bruce, granted lands in Annandale, represents another crucial element. The de Bruce family possesses extensive military experience and substantial resources, enabling them to establish effective control while contributing to overall military capabilities. Their subsequent prominence, culminating in Robert the Bruce's eventual claim to the throne, demonstrates the long-term significance of David's Norman settlement program. The physical transformation becomes immediately apparent through construction of motte and bailey castles, serving both military and administrative functions. These fortifications, artificial earthen mounds topped by wooden palisades, surrounded by enclosed courtyards, provide secure bases for Norman lords while demonstrating the new political order. Castle construction requires significant labour mobilisation, demonstrating the new lord's authority while providing economic opportunities. Skilled craftsmen find employment introducing new building techniques and architectural styles to Scotland. But David's most visible innovation is systematic establishment of royal burghs, planned commercial centres serving as hubs of commerce, craftsmanship, and international trade, while generating substantial revenues for the Crown through taxes, customs duties, market fees. This represents fundamental departure from traditional Scottish economic organisation based primarily on subsistence agriculture. Edinburgh emerges as premier example of David's urban development programme, transformed from military stronghold into thriving commercial centre, attracting merchants, craftsmen, traders from across Europe. The burgh receives extensive privileges including rights to hold markets, collect tolls, regulate trade within specified boundaries, creating incentives for commercial development. The main street stretching from the castle down the ridge toward Holyrood Abbey provides primary commercial access along which markets, workshops, merchant residences are systematically arranged. Stirling's development demonstrates David's strategic understanding of geography and commerce. Located at the lowest crossing point of the Firth of Forth, Stirling commands trade routes between highlands and lowlands while providing access to both eastern and western Scotland. Perth's location provides access to rich agricultural regions while enabling river transport connecting highland resources with international trade networks. The privileges granted to royal burghs include exclusive trading rights, protection from arbitrary taxation, legal autonomy attracting merchants and craftsmen from across Europe. David introduces silver coinage based on English models but bearing distinctively Scottish symbols, enabling participation in international trade. Foreign merchants and craftsmen receive same legal rights and commercial opportunities as native Scots, proving particularly successful in attracting Flemish weavers, German merchants, English craftsmen whose skills enhance Scottish economic capabilities. David's ecclesiastical reforms represent another crucial component, involving systematic establishment of major religious houses serving multiple functions as centres of learning, agricultural development, spiritual life, while strengthening royal authority. The foundation of Melrose Abbey in 1136 marks the beginning of ambitious monastic establishment transforming Scottish religious life. Located in the fertile Tweed Valley near the English border, Melrose possesses excellent agricultural potential, while commanding important transportation routes. The Abbey Church, built in Gothic style then emerging in France, features soaring arches, elaborate stone carving, sophisticated engineering demonstrating Scottish participation in broader European architectural developments. David arranges for experienced monks from Rievaulx Abbey in Yorkshire to establish the Scottish foundation, ensuring Melrose operates according to proven Cistercian practices. Jedburgh Abbey, founded in 1138, serves both religious and strategic functions in the volatile border region. Kelso Abbey, established in 1128, completes David's network of border abbeys, but David's most enduring contribution is creation of sophisticated administrative system involving systematic establishment of sheriffdoms, justiciars, royal courts, bringing Scotland into alignment with contemporary European practices. The sheriff system provides foundation for royal control over distant territories while ensuring consistent application of royal law throughout the kingdom. Sheriffs receive formal appointments with clearly defined jurisdictions and specific responsibilities, including tax collection, military recruitment, judicial administration, enforcement of royal commands. These officials serve at royal pleasure rather than through hereditary right, ensuring loyalty while providing mechanisms for removing ineffective administrators. Major sheriffdoms are established around Edinburgh, Stirling, Perth, Aberdeen, with boundaries drawn to encompass coherent economic and geographical units. By the time Alexander II and Alexander III rule, during the 13th century, Scotland emerges as genuinely independent European power. Alexander II's accession in 1214 coincides with political turmoil in England following King John's conflicts with his barons, providing unprecedented opportunities for Scottish territorial expansion. The Treaty of York in 1237 establishes the modern Scottish-English frontier, with Alexander renouncing claims to Northumberland, Cumberland, and Westmoreland, in exchange for English recognition of Scottish sovereignty and substantial financial compensation. More importantly, the treaty explicitly acknowledges Scotland as independent kingdom owing no feudal obligations to the English crown. Alexander III's reign from 1249 represents the most prosperous period in medieval Scottish history. The resolution of Norwegian territorial claims through military conquest eliminates the last foreign territorial presence. King Haakon IV of Norway's invasion in 1263 represents the final Norwegian attempt to maintain Scottish territories through force. The Battle of Largs in October 1263 results in comprehensive Scottish victory, effectively ending Norwegian military presence. The Treaty of Perth in 1266 formalises the transfer of Norwegian territories to Scottish control. Scotland pays Norway 4,000 marks immediately, plus annual payment of 100 marks in perpetuity, while Norway renounces all claims except Orkney and Shetland. The flourishing of Scottish culture during Alexander III's reign reflects stability and prosperity. Construction of magnificent stone cathedrals at St Andrews, Glasgow, demonstrates Scottish participation in Gothic architectural revolution. The patronage of arts and literature creates cultural achievements enhancing Scotland's international reputation. But on a stormy March night in 1286, everything changes. Alexander III rides through darkness to reach his young French wife Yolande at Kinghorn Castle, despite warnings about dangerous weather. His horse stumbles on the treacherous coastal path, throwing the king to his death on the rocks below. The 44-year-old king's death leaves Scotland without clear male heir, creating succession crisis that will ultimately destroy Scottish independence. Alexander's granddaughter Margaret, the 3-year-old Maid of Norway, becomes queen, but she dies during her voyage to Scotland in September 1290. Her death eliminates peaceful dynastic union with England while creating complex legal situation where multiple claimants possess arguable rights based on different interpretations of royal inheritance law. The two primary claimants, John Balliol and Robert Bruce the Elder, both descend from David I, but their competing arguments reflect different legal theories. Balliol's claim rests upon descent from Margaret, eldest daughter of David of Huntingdon, with supporters arguing primogeniture clearly establishes his superior right. Bruce's claim derives from his position as son of Isabel, second daughter, but supporters argue proximity of blood relationship should take precedence. The Scottish nobility, recognizing any decision by purely Scottish tribunal would likely be rejected by unsuccessful claimants, invite Edward I of England to serve as arbitrator. This proves a fatal decision. Edward accepts the arbitration role, but insists upon recognition of his overlordship over Scotland before proceeding. This transforms neutral arbitration into proceedings fundamentally altering Scotland's international status. The legal proceedings at Berwick Castle in 1291-1292 involve detailed examination of genealogical evidence and analysis of previous succession disputes across Europe. Edward's decision in favour of John Balliol in November 1292 reflects careful legal analysis. Balliol's position as senior heir according to primogeniture gives him strongest claim under feudal law. But Edward's decision also serves his political interests by placing on the Scottish throne a king whose legal position depends entirely upon English recognition. John Balliol's coronation at Scone in November 1292 marks the beginning of the most humiliating period in medieval Scottish history. Edward immediately begins treating Balliol as subordinate feudal vassal rather than independent monarch, summoning him to answer legal appeals in English courts and demanding Scottish military service for English campaigns, serving no Scottish interests. The systematic humiliation becomes apparent through incidents demonstrating Edward's determination to reduce Scotland to English province status. The crisis reaches climax when Edward demands Scottish military service for his French campaigns, treating Scotland as English feudal dependency. The Scottish nobility, recognizing continued submission would permanently destroy independence, pressure Balliol to reject Edward's demands, and assert sovereignty regardless of military consequences. The Scottish alliance with France in 1295, the Auld Alliance, represents desperate attempt to secure foreign support, while establishing diplomatic framework influencing Scottish foreign policy for centuries. Edward's invasion of Scotland in 1296 represents systematic attempt to destroy Scottish independence through overwhelming force combined with symbolic actions demonstrating permanent subjugation. Edward's army, numbering over 30,000 men, crosses the border with explicit objective of conquering Scotland. The sack of Berwick-upon-Tweed in March 1296 demonstrates Edward's determination through extreme brutality. English forces systematically slaughter civilian population of Scotland's premier commercial centre, killing thousands of merchants, craftsmen, ordinary citizens. The massacre serves no military purpose but demonstrates consequences of resistance while destroying Scotland's most important commercial centre. The Battle of Dunbar in April 1296 results in complete collapse of Scottish military resistance. The capture and humiliation of John Balliol follows. Edward systematically strips away symbols of Scottish royal authority. Balliol's forced abdication and the ceremonial tearing of royal arms from his surcoat earns him the derisive nickname Tomb Tabard, or Empty Coat. The removal of the Stone of Destiny from Scone Abbey to Westminster represents perhaps the most symbolically significant action. With the ancient inauguration stone had served as focal point of Scottish royal ceremonies for centuries, Edward's decision to transport it to Westminster and incorporate it into his own coronation throne demonstrates his intention to absorb Scottish royal authority into English kingship. The systematic destruction of Scottish governmental records eliminates documentary foundation of administrative independence. English forces deliberately target monasteries and administrative centres where royal records are maintained, destroying centuries of accumulated documentation. the establishment of English administrative control involves appointing English officials to replace Scottish governmental institutions. Edward appoints John de Warenne as Guardian of Scotland with authority to govern according to English law, while English sheriffs replace Scottish officials. But the resistance begins emerging even during initial English occupation. Individual acts of defiance, attacks on English officials, preservation of Scottish traditions in areas beyond direct English control indicate Scottish identity survives political catastrophe. In May 1297, a minor Scottish landholder named William Wallace kills William Heselrigg, Sheriff of Lanark, marking his emergence as significant resistance leader. Within weeks, Wallace assembles a force of several hundred men drawn from diverse social backgrounds: minor landholders, urban craftsmen, rural peasants, dispossessed nobles. This heterogeneous force reflects Wallace's appeal across traditional social boundaries. Wallace's military innovations become apparent during summer 1297 campaigns when his forces employ guerrilla tactics exploiting Scottish geographical advantages while avoiding direct confrontation with superior English heavy cavalry. Scottish forces operate from bases in dense forests and mountains, requiring intimate terrain knowledge combined with disciplined coordination. The coordination between Wallace's southern operations and parallel resistance led by Andrew Moray in northern Scotland demonstrates emergence of genuinely national resistance movement. Moray, whose social background as heir to prominent noble family differs markedly from Wallace's origins, escapes English captivity and establishes resistance operations throughout northern regions. The convergence of Wallace and Moray's forces for the campaign culminating in the Battle of Stirling Bridge represents a crucial moment in Scottish resistance strategy. The selection of Stirling as focus reflects sophisticated strategic thinking. The town's crucial position controls communications between northern and southern Scotland. The Battle of Stirling Bridge on September 11, 1297, demonstrates Wallace's tactical genius. Wallace positions his army on the northern side of the Firth of Forth, allowing English forces to begin crossing the narrow bridge, the only practical crossing point. The bridge's limited width means English forces can only cross in small numbers, negating their advantages while creating opportunities for Scottish forces to engage under favourable conditions. Wallace allows approximately half the English force to cross before launching assault. This timing demonstrates remarkable tactical discipline. The Scottish attack involves coordinated infantry formations exploiting confined space while preventing organised English retreat. Scottish forces employ long spears and weapons chosen for close quarters combat in restricted terrain. The battle demonstrates that properly led Scottish infantry can defeat English heavy cavalry when tactical conditions favour Scottish capabilities. Andrew Moray's death during battle deprives Scottish resistance of one of its most capable leaders, while leaving Wallace as sole commander at moment of greatest success. Wallace's elevation to sole leadership requires him to assume political responsibilities for which his social background hadn't prepared him. Wallace's assumption of title Guardian of Scotland reflects both his military achievements and complex political situation created by absence of legitimate royal authority following Balliol's forced abdication. The guardianship represents innovative constitutional arrangement, providing Wallace with authority necessary for coordinating national resistance, while avoiding claims to royal authority that might alienate supporters loyal to Balliol. But Edward the Feigned returns, determined to crush this upstart commoner. The Battle of Falkirk on July 22, 1298 demonstrates both achievements and limitations of Wallace's innovations when Scottish forces encounter Edward's reorganised army. Edward's forces include substantial numbers of Welsh longbowmen whose missile capabilities provide tactical options unavailable during previous campaigns. Wallace's deployment at Falkirk reveals continued innovative approach. He arranges Scottish forces in defensive formations called schiltrons, circular arrangements of spearmen whose long weapons create protective barriers cavalry cannot penetrate. But the failure of Scottish cavalry and defection of Scottish nobles during battle reveal continuing political divisions undermining military effectiveness. Scottish heavy cavalry, composed primarily of nobles whose loyalty remains questionable, withdraw at crucial moments when their support might have enabled victory. The tactical success of English longbowmen demonstrates evolution of military technology, challenging traditional Scottish advantages. Welsh bowmen deliver sustained missile attacks, disrupting Scottish formations from distances, preventing retaliation. Wallace's resignation from guardianship following Falkirk reflects both his recognition of military realities and his commitment to Scottish independence transcending personal ambition. New guardians, including Robert Bruce and John Comyn, provide different types of legitimacy through noble birth and family resources. Wallace's capture near Glasgow in August 1305 results from betrayal by Scottish associates. The trial at Westminster Hall represents Edward's attempt to provide legal justification for conquest while demonstrating consequences of resistance. The charges include treason, murder, arson, sacrilege, accusations reflecting English legal theories, ignoring Scottish claims to independent sovereignty. Wallace's execution on August 23, 1305 involves full ceremonial brutality of medieval punishment for treason: drawing, hanging, disemboweling, beheading, quartering. The elaborate nature exceeds normal punishment even for treason, reflecting Edward's determination to eliminate Wallace as symbol while demonstrating consequences of challenging English rule. But Wallace's martyrdom achieves precisely opposite of intended effect. Rather than crushing Scottish aspirations, his death crystallizes opposition while providing powerful symbol, inspiring the most remarkable transformation in medieval Scottish history. Within months, complex web of noble rivalries and territorial ambitions converges around unlikely figure, Robert Bruce, Earl of Carrick, grandson of the competitor, who lost to Balliol. Bruce had spent the decade navigating treacherous currents of Anglo-Scottish politics, his family's land holdings in both kingdoms creating conflicting loyalties. His fight alongside English at Falkirk earned bitter enmity from Scots who viewed such collaboration as treasonous, but Edward's systematic redistribution of Scottish lands to English nobles threatens even cooperative Scottish nobles, gradually convincing Bruce his future lies not in accommodation, but in asserting hereditary rights to independent Scottish kingship. The fateful meeting between Robert Bruce and John Comyn at Greyfriars Church in Dumfries on February 10, 1306, brings together the two most powerful claimants to Scottish leadership. Comyn, whose family dominated politics during the interregnum and whose royal connections provide alternative throne claims, represents primary obstacle to Bruce's ambitions. The church setting, chosen presumably for neutral ground, instead witnesses violence forever altering both men's legacies. Contemporary accounts vary, but most agree the meeting begins as an attempt to coordinate resistance before degenerating into heated argument over competing leadership claims. The precise sequence remains disputed, but the outcome is undeniable. John Comyn lies dying on the church floor, struck down by Bruce's dagger, in act violating both sacred sanctuary and feudal law. Rather than fleeing to seek English forgiveness, Bruce moves immediately to consolidate support among allies while seizing initiative before Comyn supporters can organize retaliation. His supporters quickly secure Dumfries Castle and begin mobilizing forces throughout southwestern Scotland, while Bruce rides north towards Scone to claim the Scottish crown before news of Comyn's death reaches Edward III. The sacrilegious nature of Comyn's murder creates immediate ecclesiastical complications. The killing within consecrated church violates fundamental principles of medieval Christianity, while subjecting Bruce to automatic excommunication, theoretically releasing all Christians from obligation to acknowledge his authority. Pope Clement V's subsequent formal excommunication creates diplomatic obstacles, complicating Scottish efforts to secure international recognition while providing Edward the Fun with additional justification for treating Bruce as criminal rather than legitimate claimant. Bruce's coronation at Scone on March 25, 1306, represents both culmination of dynastic ambitions and beginning of most challenging period of his life. The ceremony reflects desperate circumstances. Absence of Stone of Destiny requires improvised arrangements lacking traditional symbols of Scottish royal authority. The participation of Isabella Macduff, Countess of Buchan, in placing crown upon Bruce's head provides crucial legitimacy through her family's hereditary right to crown Scottish kings. But her presence cannot disguise that many of Scotland's most powerful nobles remain absent. The limited attendance reveals extent to which Scottish noble society remains divided. The common family's extensive kinship networks ensure Bruce's murder has created implacable enemies whose opposition will persist throughout his reign. Edward I's response demonstrates determination to crush Scottish independence permanently through military campaigns, eliminating not merely Bruce's political authority, but entire Scottish noble class that might support future resistance. Edward's instructions include explicit authorization to execute captured Scottish nobles without trial, to destroy religious houses providing sanctuary, to implement systematic devastation of agricultural resources, preventing future campaigns. The Battle of Methven on June 19, 1306, provides Bruce with harsh lesson in realities of medieval warfare against professional English forces. His hastily assembled army suffers catastrophic defeat, scattering supporters and forcing the new king to flee into Scottish wilderness. And the defeat eliminates most of Bruce's noble supporters through death or capture, while forcing him to abandon territorial base and seek refuge where English control remains limited. The executions of Christopher Seaton, Thomas Bruce, and other prominent supporters send clear messages about consequences while eliminating experienced military leaders. Bruce's flight into Western Highlands and Islands marks beginning of guerrilla warfare period, transforming both his understanding of military strategy and his relationship with ordinary Scots. The king's reduced circumstances, travelling with small band of loyal followers, dependent upon local support for survival, provides unprecedented exposure to conditions and concerns of common Scots, whose backing proves essential for successful resistance. The Western Highlands provide temporary sanctuary due to challenging geography and limited English administrative control. Complex network of sea locks, mountainous terrain, scattered islands create natural defensive positions negating English heavy cavalry advantages while providing numerous escape routes. Local clan leaders provide crucial support, enabling Bruce to maintain resistance despite loss of traditional territorial base. Bruce's time in islands brings him into contact with Highland military traditions differing significantly from feudal warfare, guerrilla tactics and irregular warfare strategies proving essential for later success. Highland warriors possess intimate terrain knowledge combined with mobility and tactical flexibility, enabling effective operations against larger, more heavily equipped conventional forces. At the death of Edward the Fastell on July 7, 1307, while campaigning against Bruce, eliminates the English monarch whose personal commitment drove systematic occupation policies. Edward II lacks both military experience and personal authority necessary to maintain intensive pressure his father applied. The new king's immediate withdrawal from Scotland to secure his position in England provides Bruce crucial breathing space to consolidate support while developing military capabilities necessary for sustained resistance. Edward II's character differs markedly from his father's. The new king shows greater interest in court politics and personal relationships than systematic military campaigns. This shift creates opportunities Bruce quickly exploits, launching campaigns designed to recapture strategic positions while demonstrating Scottish capabilities to potential supporters. Bruce's military innovations during this period reflect his synthesis of highland guerrilla tactics with conventional medieval warfare, creating hybrid approaches, maximizing Scottish advantages while minimizing exposure to English strengths. His forces adopt rapid movement between widely separated operational areas, making it impossible for English commanders to predict objectives while forcing English forces to disperse strength across multiple targets. The systematic campaign to recapture Scottish castles beginning in 1307 demonstrates Bruce's understanding that effective resistance requires control of fortified positions serving as secure bases while denying English forces strategic strongholds necessary for maintaining administrative control. However, Bruce's approach to castle warfare differs significantly from traditional siege practices. His limited resources preclude extended investments and elaborate siege engines. Instead, Bruce develops innovative tactics emphasizing surprise, infiltration, rapid assault techniques, capturing fortified positions without prolonged campaigns exposing Scottish forces to English counterattacks. The capture of Loudoun Hill in May 1307 marks Bruce's transition from guerrilla leader to conventional military commander, as his forces achieve decisive victory over substantial English army commanded by Aymer de Valençay. Bruce's selection of battlefield reveals growing tactical sophistication. He chooses terrain-channeling English cavalry charges into narrow fronts, where Scottish infantry formations can effectively resist, while preventing English forces from exploiting numerical superiority. But the true test comes 7 years later, in the summer of 1314, when Edward II finally assembles a massive army, perhaps 20,000 men, including 2,000 heavy cavalry, to relieve Stirling Castle, then under Scottish siege. Bruce, with perhaps 7,000 men, mostly infantry, positions his forces near Bannockburn, carefully choosing ground that negates English cavalry advantages. The Battle of Bannockburn on June 23, 24, 1314 represents the culmination of Bruce's military genius. On the first day, Bruce personally kills English knight Henry de Bohun in single combat, splitting his skull with a battle-axe, a moment that electrifies Scottish forces and demonstrates the king's personal courage. The main engagement occurs on the second day when English cavalry charges bogged down in marshy ground Bruce deliberately chose, allowing Scottish schiltron formations to hold while Bruce's cavalry strikes English flanks. The English army, packed into confined space between burn and forest, cannot maneuver. When Scottish camp followers appear on nearby hillside, English forces mistake them for fresh Scottish reinforcements and panic. The rout becomes catastrophic. Thousands of English soldiers die. Edward the Scout barely escapes, and Scotland achieves decisive victory, securing independence. Bannockburn doesn't immediately end the war. Edward II refuses to acknowledge Scottish independence despite military defeat. But the victory transforms the strategic situation. Scotland can now conduct offensive operations raiding deep into northern England while Edward cannot mount effective response. The Declaration of Arbroath in 1320, drafted by Scottish nobles and clergy, represents one of medieval Europe's most remarkable political documents, asserting that kingship derives from the people's consent rather than mere hereditary right. Yet if he should give up what he has begun, seeking to make us or our kingdom subject to the King of England or the English, we should exert ourselves at once to drive him out as our enemy. For, as long as but 100 of us remain alive, never will we on any conditions be brought under English rule. The Declaration's radical assertion of popular sovereignty centuries before such concepts become commonplace demonstrates Scottish political sophistication while providing ideological foundation for continued resistance. The Treaty of Edinburgh-Northampton in 1328 finally provides English recognition of Scottish independence. Edward III, who succeeded his deposed father Edward II, acknowledges Scotland as independent kingdom while renouncing all English claims to overlordship. The treaty includes provisions for peace, return of Scottish records, and regalia, though the Stone of Destiny remains in Westminster. and marriage alliance between Bruce's son David and Edward III's sister, Joan. Bruce's death on June 7, 1329 at Cardross Castle marks the end of an era. But his passing also initiates complex dynastic transition. His only legitimate male heir, David, is barely 5 years old, creating royal minority exposing Scotland to renewed aggression. Edward Balliol, son of deposed John Balliol, launches invasion in August 1332 with English support, claiming the Scottish throne. The Battle of Duplin Moor results in catastrophic Scottish defeat, and Balliol briefly seizes power, but Scottish resistance continues, led by nobles loyal to David II. The young king goes into French exile while Scotland endures another period of English occupation. The gradual recovery during mid-1330s reflects effectiveness of guerrilla warfare and growing unpopularity of English occupation. David II's return to Scotland in 1341 marks beginning of new phase. The 18-year-old king brings French military advisors and continental innovations, but David's capture at Battle of Neville's Cross in October 1346 creates another extended royal absence. David's 11-year captivity in England creates unprecedented opportunities for Robert Stewart, David's nephew, through Bruce's daughter Marjorie, to establish position as effective ruler, while developing skills enabling his eventual succession. Robert Stewart's regency during David II's captivity demonstrates remarkable political acumen. Stewart successfully maintains Scottish independence while managing complex diplomatic negotiations, securing the king's eventual release. His success in preserving independence establishes his credentials as effective ruler while strengthening his position as heir presumptive to the childless David II. When David II finally returns in 1357 after enormous ransom payment, Scotland has survived another crisis. David rules until 1371, dying without legitimate heirs, and the crown passes peacefully to Robert Stewart, establishing the Stuart dynasty that will rule Scotland for over 3 centuries. Robert II's accession in 1371 represents peaceful transfer of power between dynasties. Yet the new king's advanced age, he's 55 at accession, and large number of legitimate and illegitimate children create potential sources of future disputes. Robert II's relatively passive governance, reflecting both his age and preference for delegating authority, establishes precedents for Stuart kingship, emphasizing cooperation with noble elites rather than assertive royal authority. The problematic reign of Robert III, who succeeds in 1390, reveals continuing challenges. Robert III's physical disabilities resulting from pre-accession injuries limit his ability to provide effective leadership, creating opportunities for competing noble factions. His reliance upon his brother Robert, Duke of Albany, for administration creates virtual regency, persisting throughout much of the reign. The capture and probable murder of David Stewart, Duke of Rothesay and heir to throne, in 1402 represents culmination of power struggle between Robert III and Albany. Rothesay's death, officially attributed to illness but widely suspected to result from Albany's machinations, eliminates direct threat to Albany's continued dominance. James Stewart's capture by English pirates in 1406 while travelling to France for education creates the most extended period of royal absence in Scottish history. The 12-year-old prince remains in English captivity for 18 years, while Scotland is governed by regents. Albany's assumption of regency provides unprecedented opportunities to consolidate his family's power while pursuing policies serving territorial ambitions rather than broader Scottish interests. Albany's long regency demonstrates both administrative capabilities and willingness to subordinate royal interests to family advancement, creating precedents for noble independence, complicating future efforts to restore royal authority. James I's return from English captivity in 1424 initiates a period of aggressive royal centralization, fundamentally altering crown-nobility relations. Yet his assassination in 1437 at Blackfriars Monastery in Perth demonstrates violent resistance such policies provoke. The conspiracy involves prominent noble families, including Walter Stewart, Earl of Atholl, whose own throne claims provide motivation for eliminating a king whose authoritarian methods alienated much of the political establishment. The accession of 6-year-old James II in 1437 creates another extended royal minority testing institutional foundations. Archibald Douglas, 5th Earl of Douglas, emerges as dominant figure in Regency government. The Douglas family's ascendancy represents culmination of century-long territorial accumulation, making them the most powerful noble house outside the royal family itself. Their lands stretch across Scottish borders into central lowlands, encompassing some of the kingdom's most fertile regions and strategically important fortifications. The family's military reputation provides both resources and legitimacy to dominate politics during royal weakness. However, Douglas dominance represents fundamental threat to royal authority, requiring systematic dismantling once James II achieves majority and begins asserting personal control. The concentration of military power and territorial resources in single noble family creates conditions resembling earlier fragmentation. James II's personal assumption of authority in 1449 marks beginning of systematic campaign to restore royal supremacy through policies combining careful political maneuvering with decisive military action designed to eliminate the Douglas threat permanently. The young king demonstrates remarkable political sophistication in isolating Douglases from potential allies while building coalitions among other noble families, viewing Douglas dominance as threatening to their own interests. The dramatic confrontation at Stirling Castle in February 1452, when James II personally stabbed William Douglas, 8th Earl of Douglas, during royal dinner, represents culmination of escalating tension while demonstrating the king's willingness to employ extreme measures. The circumstances reveal James II's careful preparation. He had assembled sufficient military forces to deal with immediate Douglas retaliation while ensuring other nobles would support royal actions rather than rallying to Douglas support. The killing occurs during discussions about Douglas's refusal to abandon alliance with Earl of Crawford and other nobles forming confederation challenging royal authority. Rather than fleeing, royal forces move quickly to secure strategic positions throughout Douglas territory while preventing coordinated retaliation. Many potential Douglas allies had been neutralized through royal grants and political agreements, while others calculate supporting the crown offers better prospects than continuing loyalty to waning Douglas power. The siege and destruction of Douglas strongholds throughout 1452–1453 employs most advanced military technology available in 15th century Europe, massive siege cannons breaching stone fortifications previously considered impregnable. James II's personal fascination with artillery technology leads him to import cannon founders from continental Europe while establishing Scottish foundries producing heavy guns necessary for systematic siege warfare. The king's collection includes famous cannon Mons Meg, which still survives at Edinburgh Castle, representing one of most advanced artillery trains in contemporary Europe. The systematic destruction of Douglas military power culminates in Battle of Arkinholm in May 1455, where royal forces achieved decisive victory over remaining Douglas coalition, capturing or killing most of the family's military leadership. The engagement demonstrates effectiveness of royal military reforms. Disciplined infantry formations supported by artillery achieved comprehensive victory over traditional feudal forces relying primarily on heavy cavalry. The forfeiture of Douglas lands following military defeat enables James II to implement most comprehensive redistribution of noble property in Scottish medieval history, creating opportunities to reward loyal supporters while establishing royal control over strategically important territories. Former Douglas properties are divided among multiple recipients, with particular attention to preventing concentration of border fortresses under single noble control that had enabled Douglas independence. The cultural and intellectual flowering characterizing James II's reign reflects both political stability achieved through eliminating Douglas opposition and broader European Renaissance influences reaching Scotland through diplomatic and commercial connections. The establishment of University of Glasgow in 1451 provides Scotland with second major educational institution, while demonstrating royal commitment to intellectual development, serving both governmental and ecclesiastical needs. Architectural achievements, including major construction at royal residences, reflect kingdom's economic prosperity and continental European architectural influences. Reconstruction of Stirling Castle according to latest European principles creates royal residence competing with contemporary European courts, while providing secure facilities for royal administration and diplomatic activities. James II's tragic death in August 1460 during siege of Roxburgh Castle, killed by explosion of one of his own cannons, eliminates one of medieval Scotland's most effective monarchs at height of his powers, while creating another royal minority. The circumstances occurring during military campaign designed to recapture last English-held fortress in Scotland reflect his personal commitment to completing territorial unification. The regency established for 8-year-old James III reflects lessons from previous minorities, emphasizing collective leadership and institutional continuity rather than dependence upon individual noble authority. Queen Mary of Guelders assumes prominent role, bringing continental governmental experience while maintaining international connections crucial for diplomatic and military success. The capture of Roxburgh Castle in 1460, completed despite James II's death during siege, marks elimination of last English territorial presence in Scotland, while demonstrating military capabilities developed through decades of systematic royal investment. James III's personal assumption of authority in early 1470s reveals both strengths and weaknesses of the governmental system developed during previous century of Stuart rule. The king's intellectual interests and cultural sophistication reflect Renaissance influences transforming European court culture. Yet his preference for scholarly and artistic pursuits over military and political activities creates tensions with noble expectations about royal leadership. James III's patronage of humanist scholars, musicians, artists demonstrates Scottish participation in broader European cultural developments while enhancing the kingdom's international reputation. However, his apparent neglect of traditional royal responsibilities, particularly military leadership and noble consultation, gradually alienates significant portions of the political establishment. The king's preference for low-born advisors with scholarly and artistic credentials over established noble councillors violates traditional expectations while excluding powerful noble families from governmental influence they consider their hereditary right. These policies create resentment, eventually coalescing into organized opposition capable of challenging royal authority through military force. The complex international situation reflects Scotland's emergence as significant European power, whose diplomatic relationships influence broader European developments. The king's marriage negotiations involving his siblings with European royal houses demonstrate Scottish equality with other European monarchies while creating diplomatic opportunities, enhancing Scottish security and international standing. The domestic opposition emerging during 1480s reflects both specific grievances against James III's policies and broader noble resistance to systematic strengthening of royal authority characterizing Stuart rule. The conspiracy culminating in the king's death at Battle of Salchiburn in June 1488 involves some of Scotland's most prominent noble families, justifying rebellion through claims that James III violated traditional royal obligations while pursuing policies threatening Scottish independence and noble rights. The rebels use 15-year-old Prince James as figurehead, providing legal legitimacy while demonstrating commitment to preserving monarchical institutions, even while eliminating unacceptable monarch. James the Thaw's succession in 1488 at age 15 marks beginning of most brilliant period in medieval Scottish history. The young king combines intellectual sophistication and cultural interests of his father with military prowess and political acumen nobles expect from monarchs. James III's early reign demonstrates remarkable maturity and political skill, successfully reconciling noble factions that had supported and opposed his father, while implementing policies strengthening royal authority without generating systematic opposition. The cultural achievements of James IV's reign represent culmination of Scottish Renaissance development. Royal patronage of arts, learning, architecture creates cultural institutions and artistic works rivaling contemporary European achievements, while maintaining distinctively Scottish characteristics. The King's court attracts scholars, artists, intellectuals from throughout Europe, transforming Edinburgh into cosmopolitan cultural centre, demonstrating Scottish participation in broader European intellectual developments. The establishment of Royal College of Surgeons in Edinburgh in 1505 reflects the King's interest in medical and scientific advancement, while providing Scotland with professional medical education, serving both civilian and military needs. James IV's personal intellectual interests encompass extraordinary range, including medicine, theology, languages, natural philosophy, while practical skills include surgery, dentistry, various crafts demonstrating commitment to hands-on learning and experimentation. Contemporary accounts describe the king performing dental procedures and surgical operations, while his patronage of alchemical experiments and mechanical innovations reflects Renaissance interests in empirical investigation and technological development. The king's linguistic abilities, including fluency in Latin, French, Spanish, and several other languages, enable him to participate personally in diplomatic negotiations while demonstrating Scottish cultural sophistication to foreign ambassadors. Architectural projects including major construction at Holyrood Palace, Stirling Castle, other royal residences reflect both economic prosperity and continental European architectural influences. The Great Hall at Stirling Castle, completed during James IV's reign, represents one of finest examples of late medieval royal architecture in Europe, with sophisticated stone carving, elaborate timberwork, innovative heating systems demonstrating Scottish mastery of contemporary building techniques. The complex diplomatic relationships James IV maintains with European powers reflect Scotland's emergence as a significant player in European politics whose alliances are actively sought by major powers. The King's marriage to Margaret Tudor, daughter of Henry VII of England, in 1503, represents a dramatic shift in Anglo-Scottish relations while demonstrating Scottish equality with other European royal houses. The elaborate ceremonies surrounding royal wedding attract representatives from throughout Europe, providing Scotland with unprecedented international visibility while showcasing the kingdom's wealth and cultural sophistication. However, fundamental tensions between Scotland's traditional French alliance and New English connection create diplomatic complications, proving ultimately irreconcilable when broader European conflicts force Scotland to choose between competing loyalties. The League of Cambrai and subsequent European alliance systems place Scotland in difficult position of maintaining relationships with powers increasingly committed to military confrontation. James IV's attempts to balance these competing obligations demonstrate remarkable diplomatic skill, yet fundamental incompatibility of Scottish commitments will ultimately force the kingdom into military confrontation, ending the medieval period of Scottish history. Though the military preparations characterizing later years of James IV's reign reflect both the king's personal interest in military technology and his recognition that Scotland's international commitments might require military action to maintain the kingdom's credibility as a reliable ally. The development of Scottish artillery capabilities, building upon foundations established by James II, creates one of most advanced military forces in contemporary Europe while demonstrating Scottish technological sophistication. The invasion of England in August 1513, undertaken in response to French requests for Scottish military assistance against English invasion of France, represents James IV's commitment to honouring alliance obligations despite personal risks involved in confronting English forces possessing significant advantages in numbers and resources. The Scottish Army crossing the border represents largest and best-equipped military force in Scottish history, advanced artillery, professional infantry formations, noble cavalry, reflecting decades of military development and substantial financial investment. The campaign's initial success, including capture of several English border fortresses, demonstrates Scottish military capabilities while fulfilling obligations to provide meaningful assistance to French allies. Yet everything converges on one field in northern England on September 9, 1513. The Battle of Flodden represents both culmination of medieval Scottish military development and tragic end of most successful period in Scottish medieval history. James IV's decision to accept battle against English army commanded by Earl of Surrey reflects his confidence in Scottish military capabilities and commitment to decisive action achieving strategic objectives rather than limited raids characterising previous Anglo-Scottish warfare. The Scottish deployment on Flodden Hill initially provides tactical advantages, enabling Scottish artillery to inflict significant casualties on English forces. However, tactical developments during battle reveal fundamental weaknesses in Scottish military organisation, proving fatal despite the army's technological sophistication and numerical strength. The Scottish advance from defensive positions on Flodden Hill exposes them to English tactical innovations, including effective use of bill-armed infantry formations, proving superior to Scottish pike formations in close combat. Picture the chaos. Scottish pike formations, so effective when standing firm, become unwieldy when advancing downhill over broken ground. English billmen, wielding weapons like giant meat hooks, get inside the pike points, pulling Scots down, hacking them apart. The carefully drilled Scottish formations dissolve into bloody melee where English close combat weapons prove devastating. And James IV, rather than maintaining protected command position, contemporary military practice recommends fights in the front ranks alongside his nobles. It's the last act of a medieval king, personal courage over tactical sense. An English arrow or bill finds him, and Scotland's king dies in the mud, surrounded by his fallen nobility. The catastrophic Scottish casualties include the king, numerous earls, bishops, thousands of ordinary soldiers, the most devastating military defeat in Scottish history, eliminating much of political and military leadership, enabling Scottish success during previous century. The battle demonstrates that Scottish military innovations, while impressive, remain insufficient to overcome English advantages in numbers and tactical organisation when circumstances force Scotland to fight under conditions favouring English capabilities. And the death of so many prominent nobles creates succession crises throughout kingdom while eliminating experienced leadership necessary for effective governance during royal minority, inevitably following James IV's death. Think about what's lost at Flodden, not just a king but the cream of Scottish nobility, the experienced commanders who understood modern warfare, the diplomats who'd maintained Scotland's European connections, the administrators who'd built effective governmental systems. It's like someone reached into medieval Scotland and pulled out its spine. The immediate aftermath marks effective end of medieval Scotland as the kingdom faces challenges requiring adaptation to early modern political and military realities while dealing with leadership vacuum created by unprecedented casualties. The accession of 17-month-old James IV creates longest and most challenging royal minority in Scottish history, while systematic destruction of Scottish military capabilities at Flodden eliminates kingdom's ability to resist English pressure through traditional military means. The regency arrangements reflect limited options available to surviving Scottish leaders, while broader European political situation offers fewer opportunities for diplomatic manoeuvring, enabling previous Scottish recoveries from military disasters. England could have walked into Scotland and taken it, but they don't, partly because they're fighting France, partly because even after Flodden, Scottish resistance remains fierce in spirit if not in capability. Transformation of Scotland from medieval kingdom into early modern state requires fundamental changes in governmental organisation, military technology, international relationships, building upon foundations established during medieval period while adapting to new political and military realities. The Stuart dynasty's survival of Flodden catastrophe and eventual success in maintaining Scottish independence during challenging circumstances of 16th century testify to institutional strength developed during medieval period. But that's another story, the story of Reformation, of Mary Queen of Scots, of James VI becoming James I of England, and finally, ironically, uniting the two kingdoms through succession rather than conquest. For our purposes, medieval Scotland ends not with political collapse, but with military catastrophe, eliminating entire generation of leadership while demonstrating both achievements and limitations of medieval Scottish civilization. The kingdom James IV led to destruction at Flodden represented culmination of 5 centuries of political development, transforming Scotland from collection of competing tribal territories into unified European power capable of influencing continental politics while maintaining distinctive national identity. The flawed decision to fight at Flodden, the tactical errors made during battle, the king's fatal choice to fight in front ranks rather than direct operations, these weren't failures of medieval Scotland, they were the last expressions of its virtues carried to tragic extreme. Consider the journey. From 4 warring peoples after Rome's withdrawal, Picts, Gaels, Britons, Anglo-Saxons, each with distinct languages, cultures, territorial ambitions, constantly raiding each other's lands, burning settlements, taking slaves, fighting over grazing rights and river crossings. Then Christianity arrives through multiple channels but crystallizes around Columba's Iona mission, providing first genuine common ground beyond violence. Literacy, written records, legal documents, institutional continuity, all flow from monasteries becoming nodes of learning and political power. Kenneth MacAlpin's unification around 843 AD represents diplomatic and military genius, using matrilineal Pictish succession laws through his mother while leveraging Gaelic military resources, systematically arranging marriages binding former enemies, commissioning artwork speaking to both traditions, establishing Scone in Pictish heartland, demonstrating he won't impose Gaelic dominance. The kingdom survives Viking pressure that destroys other realms because Kenneth's unification provides resources to resist what separate kingdoms couldn't withstand. Malcolm III and Margaret transformed this foundation through Anglo-Saxon and continental European influences, feudal structures, Norman military techniques, Roman Catholic practices, sophisticated court culture. They don't just copy foreign models, they adapt them to Scottish conditions while preserving what works from traditional systems. David Thufburst's systematic Norman colonization, royal burgh creation, sheriff administration, represent comprehensive restructuring that some scholars call Scotland's Davidian Revolution. Not gradual change, but deliberate, comprehensive transformation over 30 years. The Normans he brings, Fitzalans, Bruces, others, don't just arrive as conquerors. They integrate through marriages with Scottish nobility, adopt local customs while introducing continental innovations, eventually become more Scottish than the Scots themselves. Robert the Bruce descends from David the Further's Norman settlement, yet leads quintessentially Scottish resistance to English occupation. The wars of independence under Wallace and Bruce establish something remarkable: Scottish national consciousness transcending feudal relationships. Wallace isn't fighting for his feudal lord or family clan, he's fighting for Scotland. for an abstract national identity most medieval people didn't possess. The Declaration of Arbroath articulates this in language centuries ahead of its time. Kingship derives from the people's consent, not merely divine right or hereditary succession. As long as but 100 of us remain alive, never will we on any conditions be brought under English rule. This isn't feudal obligation speaking, it's national identity. The Stuart dynasty from Robert II through James IV demonstrates institutional maturity, enabling Scotland to survive repeated royal minorities, internal conflicts, external pressures that would destroy less developed kingdoms. When David II dies childless in 1371, power transfers peacefully to Robert Stuart through established succession law. No civil war, no competing claimants tearing the realm apart. When James I is assassinated in 1437, when James III dies at Sauchiburn in 1488, governmental institutions continue functioning despite royal deaths, demonstrating Scotland's evolution from personal monarchy to institutional state. James II's destruction of Douglas power shows sophisticated understanding that effective kingship requires more than military victory. It needs legal justification, political coalition building, systematic redistribution, preventing power reconcentration. He doesn't just defeat the Douglases militarily. He creates legal cases for forfeiture, builds alliances with other nobles viewing Douglas dominance as threat, redistributes Douglas lands among multiple families, preventing any single house from achieving similar power. The artillery he employs represents technological sophistication, importing continental cannon founders, establishing Scottish foundries, collecting siege weapons rivaling any European army's capabilities. This isn't backward medieval kingdom. This is technologically advanced state participating in European military revolution. James IV represents culmination, Renaissance prince who performs surgery, speaks 6 languages, patronizes humanist scholars and artists, yet also personally leads armies and understands military technology. The Royal College of Surgeons he establishes in 1505, the Great Hall at Stirling Castle, demonstrating architectural mastery, the court attracting intellectuals from across Europe. These aren't isolated achievements but systematic program elevating Scotland to European cultural leadership. His marriage to Margaret Tudor represents diplomatic triumph. Scotland achieving equality with England through prestigious alliance rather than subordination. The elaborate wedding ceremonies attended by representatives from throughout Europe showcase Scottish wealth and sophistication to international audience. But James III's diplomatic balancing act between French alliance and English marriage proves ultimately impossible when European conflicts force Scotland to choose sides. His invasion of England in 1513 honours alliance obligations to France while hoping to achieve limited objectives, capture border fortresses, force English withdrawal from France, demonstrates Scottish reliability as ally. He doesn't anticipate that Surrey's English army will force decisive battle, doesn't expect his tactical advantages on Flodden Hill will prove insufficient, doesn't imagine he'll die in the front ranks surrounded by his fallen nobility. Flodden's catastrophe reveals fundamental truth about medieval warfare. Technological sophistication and tactical innovation matter, but so do terrain, troop discipline, close combat capabilities, and, crucially, command decisions. James IV's decision to abandon strong defensive position on Flodden Hill and advance against English forces proves fatal. His choice to fight in front ranks rather than direct operations from secure position eliminates Scottish command structure at a moment when coordinated leadership might enable tactical recovery. The Scottish pike formations, so effective when standing firm, become unwieldy advancing downhill over broken ground, while English billmen excel in exactly these close quarters conditions. The death toll is staggering. The king, 9 earls, 14 lords, an archbishop, 2 bishops, 2 abbots, and perhaps 10,000 men. the largest proportional loss of nobility in any British battle before or since. Families lose fathers and sons simultaneously. Some noble houses are extinguished entirely. The political leadership that had guided Scotland through previous century of relative success simply vanishes in one afternoon's butchery. Yet Scotland survives. The institutions built over centuries, sheriffdoms, royal burghs, universities, ecclesiastical administration, legal systems, continue functioning despite leadership vacuum. Mary of Guelders, as regent, maintains governmental continuity. The Stuart dynasty survives through infant James V, eventually producing Mary Queen of Scots, then James II, who becomes James I of England, finally achieving through inheritance the union Edward the Firm sought through conquest. The medieval achievement, then, isn't just survival, it's the creation of institutions, cultural identity, and political structures robust enough to survive catastrophes that would destroy less developed kingdoms. Scotland enters medieval period as four separate peoples speaking different languages, following different customs, practicing different forms of Christianity. It emerges as unified kingdom with distinctive national identity, sophisticated governmental institutions, rich cultural traditions, and fierce commitment to independence that will persist through centuries of English pressure. The architectural legacy remains visible. Edinburgh Castle dominating its volcanic crag, Stirling Castle with its Great Hall, St Andrew's Cathedral ruins, countless abbeys and fortifications dotting the landscape. The cultural achievements persist. Universities founded during this period still operate today. Legal traditions established then influence Scottish law now. The Auld alliance with France shapes diplomatic relationships centuries later. The linguistic transformation creating Scots from combination of Anglo-Saxon, Gaelic, French and Latin influences produces distinctive language expressing Scottish identity. The literature, Barber's The Bruce, Henryson's poetry, Dunbar's verses, establishes Scottish literary tradition continuing through Burns, Scott and beyond. Most importantly, the idea of Scotland as independent nation with legitimate existence separate from England, with its own political traditions and cultural identity deserving preservation and defence, this emerges fully formed from medieval period and persists despite English conquest attempts, despite dynastic unions, despite political pressures that would absorb less defined national identities. The medieval Scots didn't just survive, they built something worth surviving for. Consider Wallace's execution. Edward the Stoics thinks brutal public death will crush resistance, but it achieves opposite effect, making Wallace martyr, whose memory inspires continued resistance. Consider Bruce's murder of Comyn in church, an act of sacrilege and betrayal that should destroy his legitimacy, instead becomes foundation for successful kingship because he channels it into decisive action, securing Scottish independence. Consider Bannockburn, smaller Scottish army using terrain and tactics to defeat much larger English force, demonstrating that determined defence of homeland can overcome numerical and technological advantages. Consider the Declaration of Arbroath, barons and clergy articulating political philosophy centuries ahead of its time, asserting popular sovereignty and national rights in era when most people believed kings ruled by divine right, regardless of subjects' wishes. These aren't just historical incidents, they're founding myths establishing Scottish national character, resistance to oppression, defence of independence, democratic impulses, stubborn refusal to accept subjugation even when pragmatism suggests submission. Whether these myths accurately reflect medieval reality matters less than that Scots believe them, internalise them, use them to shape future actions. The medieval period establishes narrative framework within which Scots understand their history. Small nation defending independence against larger aggressive neighbour, using intelligence and determination to overcome disadvantages in population and resources, maintaining distinctive culture and political traditions despite pressure to assimilate valuing education and learning while respecting martial prowess. This narrative, whatever its historical accuracy, provides powerful unifying force, shaping Scottish identity through subsequent centuries. Institutions created during medieval period, universities educating Scottish elites, legal system based on distinctive Scottish traditions, Presbyterian church emerging from medieval Catholic foundations, burgh system creating commercial centres, clan structures in highlands maintaining traditional governance, all persist in modified forms into early modern and modern periods, providing continuity connecting contemporary Scotland to medieval achievements. The territorial unity achieved during medieval period, with borders established through centuries of warfare and negotiation, remains essentially unchanged into modern era. The line drawn at Treaty of York in 1237 and solidified through subsequent conflicts defines Scotland's extent with minor modifications. This territorial integrity, defended successfully against repeated English conquest attempts, provides foundation for all subsequent Scottish history. The medieval Scottish economy, based on wool exports, agricultural production, urban commerce, develops patterns persisting for centuries. The royal burghs established by David I and successors remain commercial centres. The trade relationships cultivated with continental Europe, particularly Flanders and France, create economic networks surviving into early modern period. The agricultural improvements introduced, three-field system, selective livestock breeding, land reclamation, increase productivity supporting larger populations and economic growth. The military traditions developed during medieval period, emphasis on pike formations and coordinated infantry, early adoption of artillery, guerrilla warfare tactics used against English occupations, influenced Scottish military service in European armies throughout early modern period. Scottish soldiers earn reputations as formidable fighters, with Scottish regiments serving in French, Swedish, Dutch and other continental armies, maintaining military traditions rooted in medieval experience. The religious developments, particularly establishment of Iona and other monasteries as centres of learning and spiritual life, create foundations for Scotland's later Protestant Reformation. The medieval church's corruption and wealth make it target for reform, but church institutions themselves, parish system, cathedral chapters, monastic properties, provide structures Reformed Church adapts rather than replaces. The intense religiosity characterizing Scottish medieval culture, with its emphasis on personal faith and resistance to imposed authority, foreshadows Presbyterian emphasis on individual conscience and democratic church governance. The political culture emerging from medieval period, suspicious of centralized authority, valuing local governance, asserting rights against royal absolutism, maintaining traditions of noble resistance to unjust royal actions, shapes Scottish political development through early modern period. The tensions between Stuart kings seeking absolute authority and nobility, defending traditional privileges, between royal centralization and local autonomy, between court culture and highland traditions, all reflect patterns established during medieval period when Scottish political identity forms. The cultural achievements, architectural, literary, artistic, intellectual, establish Scotland as significant European civilization rather than peripheral backwater. The universities at St Andrews, Glasgow, Aberdeen produce scholars contributing to European learning. The Gothic cathedrals demonstrate architectural sophistication. The illuminated manuscripts, metalwork, stone carving show artistic excellence. The poetry and prose create literary traditions. These aren't imitations of English or continental models, but distinctive Scottish contributions to European culture. The sense of separate Scottish identity, perhaps the medieval period's most important legacy, provides foundation enabling Scotland's survival as distinct nation despite dynastic union with England in 1603 and political union in 1707. The medieval experience of defending independence against repeated English conquest attempts creates narratives and symbols. Wallace, Bruce, Bannockburn, the Declaration of Arbroath, that persist as touchstones of Scottish national identity. When Scots in later centuries debate their relationship with England, they reference medieval precedents. When they assert distinctive national character, they cite medieval achievements. When they defend Scottish institutions against Anglicisation, they invoke medieval traditions. The medieval period thus provides not just historical background but active political force, shaping subsequent Scottish development. Flodden, then, represents not end of Scottish civilization, but transition point marking shift from medieval to early modern period. Catastrophic loss of leadership requires adaptation. Scotland can no longer compete militarily with England on equal terms, can no longer pursue fully independent foreign policy, must accommodate English power while maintaining domestic autonomy and cultural distinctiveness. These limitations, established through Flodden's disaster, define Scottish politics through subsequent centuries until the Union of 1707 and beyond. Yet the medieval foundations prove strong enough to sustain Scottish identity through these challenges. The institutions continue functioning, the cultural traditions persist, the national consciousness survives. Medieval Scotland's greatest achievement ultimately isn't military victory or territorial expansion or cultural flowering, though it accomplishes all these. It's the creation of Scottish nation, the transformation of diverse peoples, speaking different languages, following different customs, worshipping different gods, into unified people sharing common identity, institutions, culture, and commitment to independence. This transformation, accomplished over 5 centuries through warfare and diplomacy, conquest and accommodation, cultural synthesis and institutional development, represents one of medieval Europe's remarkable state-building achievements. From Rome's withdrawal in 410 to Flodden in 1513, Scotland evolves from frontier zone of competing tribal territories into sophisticated European kingdom with advanced governmental institutions, rich cultural traditions, strong national identity, and proven ability to defend independence against superior enemies. The medieval Scottish achievement resonates beyond Scotland's borders. The Declaration of Arbroath influences later democratic theory. The wars of independence inspire other small nations resisting powerful neighbours. The cultural achievements contribute to European civilization. The institutional innovations influence governmental development elsewhere. Medieval Scotland isn't isolated backwater, but active participant in European civilization, contributing to and shaped by broader European developments while maintaining distinctive character. The tragedy of Flodden shouldn't obscure the achievement it culminates. James the Thaw's Scotland represents high point of medieval Scottish civilization, culturally sophisticated, militarily formidable, diplomatically connected, economically prosperous, institutionally mature. That such achievement ends in afternoon's catastrophe demonstrates medieval warfare's brutal unpredictability, not Scottish civilization's inherent weakness. Better tactical decisions at Flodden could have produced Scottish victory, maintaining Scotland's medieval trajectory. Instead, one battle's outcome redirects Scottish history, forcing adaptation to early modern realities while building upon medieval foundations. The medieval Scots who built this civilization, Kenneth MacAlpin unifying Picts and Gaels, Malcolm and Margaret introducing Anglo-Saxon and continental influences, David the One restructuring society along feudal lines, Wallace and Bruce fighting for independence, Stuart kings consolidating royal authority, scholars establishing universities, monks illuminating manuscripts, masons building cathedrals, merchants developing commerce. These weren't just surviving, they were creating. They built nation from fragments, defended it against repeated conquest attempts, developed distinctive culture and institutions, established traditions persisting into modern era. Their achievement survives Flodden's catastrophe, survives subsequent English pressure, survives dynastic and political unions, survives into contemporary Scotland, where medieval heritage remains visible in landscape, institutions, culture, and national consciousness. This is the true legacy of medieval Scotland, not just historical events, but living traditions, not just past achievements, but present identity. Not just medieval kingdom, but modern nation whose character and consciousness were forged during those 5 centuries between Rome's withdrawal and Flodden's catastrophe. The medieval Scots didn't just build kingdom, they built Scotland itself, and that achievement endures regardless of medieval period's tragic conclusion. Subscribe to Colossus of Empires to explore more civilizations that shaped our world through triumph, tragedy, and transformation.